Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thanks so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. So today's video, we're talking all about wedding invitations and primarily how to word the more uncomfortable or awkward topics when it comes to your wedding invitations. When I say uncomfortable topics, we're talking about things like only inviting guests to a reception or having a reception only, not ceremony included, having a adults only wedding, so no kids, if you are enforcing a particular type of dress code, or not serving a meal at your wedding. So to start off, let's talk about the reception only invites. So perhaps you are having a very small, intimate ceremony either the same day, or maybe you and your partner are eloping, going to the courthouse, doing something very small and intimate together just for your ceremony, and then you're wanting to have a reception style celebration with the remainder of your guests, or maybe you're only inviting a small group of people to your actual ceremony, and then you're going to have a larger group at your reception. This needs to be relayed on your wedding invitation. So keep in mind that anyone that is invited to your ceremony is automatically an invitation to the reception. You can have people that are invited only to the reception and not the ceremony, but that doesn't really work the other way around. So keep that in mind. If you're trying to keep numbers down for your reception, for dinner, or anything like that, anyone included in your ceremony is going to be at your reception. That is just proper etiquette. That is just good manners. So just keep that in mind. Now you can, however, have just people that are invited to the ceremony and reception, and only have a group of people that are invited only to the reception itself. Now, to relay this to your guests, you are going to want to make sure that on your wedding invitations, you're not using, for your guests that you're only inviting to the reception, that you're not using wording like, we invite you to the wedding of so-and-so, or so-and-so invite you to celebrate the wedding of. You don't want to use the word wedding. And wedding is what kind of insinuates that there will be a ceremony, a wedding ceremony. So you want to make sure that you are using the word reception or celebration in your invitations for those reception invites only. For example, John and Jane invite you to celebrate their marriage at such and such place, and you put all of your reception information here. Or John and Jane invite you in celebration of the newlyweds at such and such place, and your reception information there. Something that indicates that the wedding has already taken place and this will be only a reception. When it comes to actually making your invitations, you've got a couple options here. You will either have two separate sets of invitations. You will have one invitation that has the ceremony information and the reception information on it, and a separate invitation that has only reception information, and then you send those to your two separate guest lists. Or if you're trying to save money on actual invitations and the paper itself, you can have one invitation information that just has the reception, and that goes out to everybody. And then for those guests that you are including in the ceremony, you can have just a small insert that you can put into those envelopes with the ceremony information on it. That way you're not having to print two separate invitations. You just have a small addition into the invitations for the guests that are attending the ceremony as well. Your wedding website is a great place to include more information about this as well. Make sure that on your wedding website you are not including the ceremony information, as you want your website to be a resource for all guests. So if you are sending out your website information to every single one of your guests, you don't want to have that ceremony information on there for the guests that are not invited to the ceremony, because that can be very confusing, and it will also make it very obvious that they are not included to a certain portion of the wedding. So wedding website, if you're having a reception only invitation for some guests, only have reception information on your wedding website, and just relay any important ceremony info to the specific guests personally and from yourself, not on your website. Moving on to having a wedding without any kids. This is becoming increasingly popular, so this isn't as uncommon as it used to be, and it's not as taboo, I guess. There are always going to be people that are not going to love this if they get invited to a wedding and they are told that their children cannot come. So just kind of be prepared for that. That's something that is common. Some people are very excited about it, and some people are super understanding of it. And then you always have the handful that are not super excited and happy about it. So you want to make sure that you are approaching the topic with as much respect as possible, but when it comes down to it, it is your wedding, and if you don't want to have kids there, or maybe you're getting married at a location that is not great for kids to be at, maybe there's a large body of water nearby and it's going to require somebody to be watching their child 24/7, that makes sense to not have kids at your wedding. So when it comes to kind of wording this and letting your guests know, on your actual wedding invitations, themselves, you want to say this in the small amount of words as possible, and maybe not even put it on your wedding invitation, but have it on your wedding website in more detail. I would somehow word it in your invitation that it's indicating that it's adult only, but maybe not use the explicit words "no children allowed" or "please no kids" or anything like that on your wedding invitation itself. Things you can say are, "We, John and Jane, invite you to the adult only reception at such and such place." And that way the words are there, but it's not as explicitly saying "no kids allowed" as saying "no kids allowed." And you can put that information on your wedding website and maybe go into more detail as to why that's the case. Just make sure that that is relayed in greater detail on your wedding website. Other phrases you can use are, "We kindly request that this is an adult-only event. Due to the nature of location, we cannot have children under the age of," whatever parameter you want to put there, "in attendance at this event." Or you can go a little bit more casual and be like, "We want you to kick off your shoes and celebrate all night long with us, call up the babysitter and have a night free of the kids," or something like that. You can be as formal or as casual as makes sense for you and your wedding. If you want to have an adult only reception, do not bend the rules for some people and not for others. The only time that there should be any kids at your wedding, if you are having a kid-free wedding, is if they are in your wedding ceremony. If you have flower girls or ring bearers that are children in your wedding ceremony, they obviously might be present at your reception or for part of your reception. If there are kids that were not in the wedding ceremony that are at your reception that you have allowed, because maybe your best friend has a kid and they weren't in the wedding, but they're like family, so you allowed them to come, that's just a bad look, and that's a recipe to have disgruntled guests. So if you're going to have the rule be no children, make sure that that is a firm rule, and if you do have kids, have them incorporated into the wedding ceremony itself in some way, shape, or form. Now, let's talk about dress code. So there are some couples that do choose to have a specific dress code, and there are, and most of the time on your wedding invitation, you will indicate some type of dress code, whether that is just a very generic kind of blanket statement like semi-formal or black tie or business casual or whatever that's going to be. However, if you are somebody that is wanting to have a little bit more specific dress code, which is something that we have seen trending lately, that is something that you do want to make sure that you are explicitly telling guests. When it comes to the wedding invitation itself, if you are having a dress code that is not the generic black tie, semi-formal, business casual, any of those, if you are, for example, wanting to have all of your guests wear all black, or if you want all of your guests to wear white or pink or a specific color or a very specific request, you want to indicate something onto your wedding invitation, like refer to wedding website for more information regarding dress code and reception location, something like that, so that they're referring to your wedding website for more information. You don't really want to put the specific dress code information in that much detail on your wedding invitation. There's only so much space for wording and for information on your invitation. You don't want to clutter it with too much information, and you also want to resist looking more on the tacky side by having too much information and too much wording, especially something that is not just a kind of generic statement when it comes to dress code. Black tie or formal, or black tie optional, semi-formal, business casual, beach garden party attire, cocktail attire, those types of things you can put on your wedding invitation. But if you are wanting to relay a more specific message to your guests, put that information on your wedding website and make sure you are directing your guests to your wedding website with that information, your website information on your wedding invitation. If you do not plan to serve a meal at your wedding, if you're having maybe a brunch wedding that's like an early, late morning, early afternoon wedding ceremony and kind of an early reception, or if you're having a late reception that's going to take place after dinner, whatever the timing, if you do not plan to serve a meal, this needs to be relayed to your guests. So on the invitation, you want to make sure that you are putting something like, "Please join us for a cocktail reception following the ceremony," or have your ceremony information and then say, "Please join us for cake and dancing following the ceremony." Something that is going to relay the information that there might be appetizers or dessert, but not food. And again, you can go into more detail on your wedding website with this, but make sure you have some type of phrasing that is going to make it clear that there is not a meal served at your wedding on your wedding invitation. And finally, let's talk about plus ones. So this is something that always comes up for couples when it comes to allowing plus ones. How do you relay the information that some people have a plus one and some people do not? So While you're not going to really like list this on your wedding invitation, it's important to take the proper steps that's going to relay that information to your guests when it comes to addressing the invitation and RSVP information, as the invitation itself is not going to say whether they have a +1 or not. Obviously, married couples, families, those are going to already have a given +1 or plus several, depending on how many people are in that family, and this will be addressed as such on the wedding invitation, the envelope itself. So you will be addressing to the entire family. That means everyone in the family is invited if they are included on the envelope. If it's a couple, then you want to put both the couple's names on the envelope. They are both invited. When you have the single individual that you are inviting, and to distinguish whether they are getting a +1 or not, you have the choice of addressing the envelope to, for example, if it was for myself, to Emily Medeiros and guest on the envelope itself, and that way that is a given that you have a +1. If it is addressed to just myself only, then I am assuming that I am the only one invited. Another way to relay this information is on the RSVP card. So when you are giving guests the option to RSVP, whether that is on a physical card or online, they should each be allotted a certain number of people. So if they are RSVPing on a card, it should say if they have a +1, there should be a spot to check for their name, and there should be a spot to write in their guest's name if they are allowed a guest. If they are not allowed a +1, there should not be any additional information or an option to have a write-in spot for having a guest, or a spot to write in the number of guests. So you might need to distinguish what type of card goes into which type of envelope if you have certain guests that are allowed a +1 and certain guests that are only getting the individual invite. Same thing goes for an online RSVP. If you are having guests RSVP online, do not have an option for them to select the number of guests that they're RSVPing for if it's just a singular person that is being invited. Hopefully that makes sense. To sum it up, you want to make sure that it is clear how many people are invited when the guest receives their invitation, so that you are kind of fielding those questions of, hey, can I bring a +1 to the wedding? Or do I get a +1 to the wedding? You want to make sure that it is clear and concise when the guest receives their invitation on who is invited and who they are allowed to bring. There could be some uncomfortable topics or conversations that some couples need to have with their guests when it comes to their wedding invitations and just wedding planning overall. And you want to make sure that you are approaching those topics with as much respect and professionalism and class as possible. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.